All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Judaism podcast. Today we're going to learn Siman 38, Lamed Ches. 38, the 38th Siman. We're going to discuss, previously we discussed immersing utensils that were acquired from a non-Jew or manufactured by a non-Jew. Now we're going to talk about food being kosher. Food needs to be kosher. We know that. We spoke about many of the dietary laws. But now we're going to talk about food that was made by a non-Jew. Now, this siman is going to be divided up into three different categories. The first is about things that were baked, bread that was baked by an idolater. Then we're going to talk about things that's going to be the first five simanim. Then we're going to talk about food cooked by an idolater. And then we're going to talk about milk of an idolater. Okay, so just as an introduction, ArtScroll does a magnificent job summarizing and doing a great job writing these beautiful introductions. So let's begin with that. Number one, okay, is that the dietary laws that are included in this siman are not biblically mandated. They're not biblically mandated. Rather, the sages, recognizing the risks inherent in social interactions with idolaters, sought to place barriers between Jews and their idolatrous neighbors. Understanding that mealtimes provide unique opportunities for social relationships that might lead to intermarriage, they enacted a series of dietary laws that were designed to prevent Jews from sharing meals with idolaters. These include prohibiting a Jew from eating bread baked by an idolater or food cooked by an idolater, even if it had been ascertained that all of the ingredients were kosher. Also, of concern to the sages was the milk of idolaters due to the possibility that it might contain milk of non-kosher animals. It's a serious concern, right? The sages therefore instituted that one may not drink milk from an idolater unless a Jew supervised and observed the milking process, in which case one can be certain that the milk is only of a kosher animal. Due to a concern with regard to the cheese-making process, which is a derivative of the milk, they also prohibited cheese of an idolater. Okay, so now we're talking about, in order to know that the food that you're eating is indeed kosher, you need to make sure that it was done by a Jew and that the process was done, all the ingredients were done, that we used were kosher, etc., etc. And this alleviates a concern, so that way we know that the food that we're eating is kosher. Okay, I just want to share with you a very quick story. You know, when you fly in the plane, you have food that's served, and you can order kosher food. I highly recommend that you order kosher food for a practical reason, aside for the halachic reason. Obviously, the Torah says we should only eat kosher, so that's a great reason on its own. But also because they serve the kosher food first. Okay, so you get your food first. So it's just from a pragmatic standpoint. Okay, if you didn't care about the kosher that God commands, I'm telling you that it's beneficial just because you get the food first. Okay, but there was a story. Now, I do this as well. Every time before I fly, I make sure I buy a sandwich, I buy something, because there's always mishaps that happen. As you know, I just traveled to Israel last week. I came back 2 weeks ago before Shabbos, and then came back this week before Shabbos, just 2 days ago on Friday. And we went for a great celebration of the bris of our second grandson, and it was very, very special. And before I flew there, and before I flew back, I went to the kosher deli. You go to a kosher restaurant and you buy a sandwich. Why do I buy a sandwich? Because what if the airline doesn't have kosher food? I've had that where we order it and it's like, oh, sorry, we didn't get the order in time or whatever, for whatever reason, and then I can't eat anything the whole flight. It's a 12-hour flight. Sometimes it could be a long travel, and it's a lot of time without eating. So I always make sure that I have a sandwich, I have some snack, I have something. Okay. The halacha says something very interesting. The halacha says that one should not allow his meat to be unsupervised. Okay, so if you have a deli sandwich, it should be with you at all times. Okay, if it loses eye contact with you, it's problematic. Okay, So this guy was once on a plane. This didn't happen to me. It happened to someone else. This guy was once on a plane, and he takes out a sandwich, and he realizes, oh my gosh, this is bread. I have to go wash my hands before I eat bread. So he says, okay. He takes a sandwich, puts it aside. He tells the guy, I'm just coming right back. Goes to the bathroom, washes his hands, comes back. He's like, 1 second. Doesn't the halacha say that bread, that meat that has lost eye contact with a Jew, meaning that it hasn't been supervised, you're not supposed to eat it? So he says, you know what? I'm not going to eat it. He just leaves the sandwich, folds it back up, and doesn't eat his sandwich. The guy sitting next to him is a non-Jew. And he says to him, I noticed that you opened up your sandwich, but you didn't eat it. What's going on? He says, well, in Jewish law, if you lose contact with your meat or your deli or whatever it is, then you're not supposed to eat it. He says, well, actually, I saw your sandwich and I thought maybe I should figure out what's kosher and what's not kosher. So I actually swapped my sandwich with yours. Okay, this is a true story. I actually swapped mine with yours. And I was wondering, this is right. So this is an example. This is an example of how sometimes these are things that our sages were concerned about, and the sages therefore said there's only something that you need verification that what you're eating is kosher, and there's only one way to have that, is to have the supervision, to have these certain barriers that limit exposure to things that are not kosher. That's the agenda here. It's not to put anyone down. It's to ensure that we are at the highest standard for the food that we eat and the things that we consume. Okay, so Seifim number 1 through 5 outline the laws of bread baked by an idolater. In earlier times, the rabbinical court issued a decree prohibiting the consumption of any bread baked by idolaters. At a later point, another rabbinical court partially suspended this prohibition. Authorities differ regarding the level of prohibition that remains today. Okay, so there are those who wouldn't touch bread that has been baked by a non-Jew. There are some people today who do. For example, you can go today to almost any single supermarket today, and you can find Wonder Bread. Wonder Bread has a kosher supervision. That means that all the ingredients that are being used are kosher. Was it baked by a Jew? Probably not. Okay, probably not. So I don't think they have Jews sitting in those factories and making that Wonder Bread. So probably they had a Jew turn on the fire. So right, but it's still, this is something that we need to be concerned of to ensure. Now, there's something before we start getting into the actual halacha of we have to understand another thing, is that we're talking about kosher, not that only the ingredients are kosher, but the way in which it was made was kosher. Okay, the process of getting all of those ingredients to your table was kosher. That's number one. Number two is that we have to understand that it's very rare that a rabbinical court supersedes a previous ruling. It almost never happens. For example, just like we have in the United States, we have the Supreme Court. Once the Supreme Court makes a ruling, you can't, with a lower court, remove that. Ever. Supreme Court ruling, finished. It's done. The same in a Jewish court. When a Jewish court gives a ruling, it can't be superseded by a different court unless it was not fully observed by everyone. We can get into this. I know you're going to have questions about this. I'm looking forward to them in the Ask Away segment of our Everyday Judaism podcast. So, in general, a later court may not abolish a decree enacted by an earlier court. However, in cases where the original decree was not upheld by a majority of the Jewish people, even at the time when it was instituted, due to the difficulty involved in compliance, a later court may abolish the decree under certain limited circumstances. Very limited circumstances. The blanket prohibition against all bread baked by an idolater was such a decree. Bread is a basic staple in life, and when a Jewish baker was not available, it was found to be too difficult for most people to comply with this prohibition. Okay, so we understand this. This is very important for us to have this in the back of our mind while we're going through this study. Now, there's another thing, and that is that food, when you want to connect with someone, when you go on a date, right, Mark? When you go on a date and you want to court someone in marriage, so what do? You take them on a nice dinner, you take them. Food has a tremendous bonding experience. We have to recognize this. Food, there's books and books about how to build relationships in business, and a lot of it is about taking people out for lunch and making sure that you're spending time with people, because everyone's got to eat. So you can eat alone in your office, or you can eat socializing. And socializing, you become closer, you build relationships, et cetera, et cetera. We have to realize that when we eat food, we're doing more than just eating and consuming. By building that relationship, particularly our sages were concerned, with the non-Jew, you may come to a point of intermarriage because you're like, they're really nice people. They're great. What's the problem? There's no problem. And the rabbis wanted to limit the intermarriage of Jews with non-Jews. Okay? Therefore, we have these halachas, and we will see them as we proceed here. Now, there are only 15 seifim, and the first 5 are dealing with bread. The next 7 are dealing with food cooked by an idolater, and then we're dealing with the rest of it is about milk and cheese and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's begin. Asru chachamim lechol pas shel akum. The sages prohibited eating the bread of an idolater. However, there are places where the custom is to be lenient in regarding to this prohibition. And people do purchase bread from an idolatrous baker if there isn't a Jewish baker. So if there is no Jewish baker, today in Houston, we're very lucky that we do have facilities that are where the bread is baked by a Jew. For example, you have HEB sells Pas Yisrael. They sell Jewish bread. We call it Jewish rye bread. It became a name also, but that doesn't mean that it was baked by a Jew, by the way. You can find non-kosher Jewish rye bread, but you have the bakery that has their stuff are produced by Jews as well. And there are other places in our community. Not every community has that. Not every community has it. They can buy fresh bread baked by a Jew. So, afilu yesh, or they purchase from an idolatrous bakery, even if there is a Jewish baker. Elo she'ein hapas yafeh k'mozeh. But the Jewish baker perhaps doesn't make the bread as delicious or as good as the idolatrous baker. Aval bepashel balabatim akum. However, regarding the idolater's homemade bread, ein mikilin. There's nobody who's lenient about that, because that's someone's own private, personal. Again, think of it in the relationship building process. Someone gives you their own personal baked bread from their home is a much bigger relationship builder than buying it from the store, right? Store bought or manufactured through the industrial places that we have today. Okay. With the exception of a pressing situation, then even if that's the only bread you're able to buy is one which is a homemade bread, then again, we prefer you live than die. Okay, so mishu, if the only thing you have is to buy bread from a non-Jew, that is fine. If there's no other option. Mishu bader, someone who is since one should not be lenient in a non-pressing situation, therefore, with regard to one who is on a journey, someone who's traveling, if they're able to acquire acceptable Jewish baked bread, they must delay their meal and travel up to a parsa, which is approximately 2.5 miles, to purchase bread that was baked by a Jew rather than eat bread that was baked by an idolater. So let's say in order to get your bread that was the Jewish bread, you're going to have to travel 20 miles. So you're not obligated to travel that far, and it's considered a pressing situation if the only thing you have is an idolater's bread. Okay, v'lo mikri pas balabais. Even bread baked at home is not considered homemade bread for the purposes of this halacha. Ella imaso b'shvil b'nei beiso, unless he made it for the members of his own household. Aval imaso limkor mikri nachtom. However, if this person made their homemade bread to sell, it's not considered that it's a homemade. It's not considered homemade bread. It's considered industrial. He's like a baker. Happens to be that he's making it out of his house, but because his intention was to sell it, it's considered like a baker's bread. Even though baking is not his regular vocation, similarly, if a baker made the bread for the members of his household, mikri bal habayis, he is considered a homemaker with respect to that bread. Okay? Yesh misha omer, there are those who say that if there is no baker found in the area, mutar afilu b'pas bal habayis, then even homemade bread is permitted. Ve'ein tzorach lahamtin al pas kosher, and the person is not required to wait for acceptable bread to be brought to him from elsewhere. And this is the acceptable practice. So if a person is living in a place where they don't have bread, okay, so someone's living out in Corpus Christi, Texas, and there's no kosher baker there, and the bread that they got from Houston the last time they were here is moldy, so now they have no bread. What are they going to eat? So it's not ideal, but they're allowed to buy the bread because it is a pressing situation and they don't have an alternative for that bread. Okay, halacha number 2. Im Yisrael hishlech hafilu rak eitz echad. If a Jew threw even just one piece of wood into the fire of the oven, l'toch hatanur beheseko, into the oven while it was being heated, mutar hapas, then the bread baked in that fire is permitted. And the bread that's baked and that is not considered the bread of an idolater, because the Jew was involved in the process of the bread baking. It's not exclusively an idolater's bread. So therefore, you'll have many of the kashrus agencies will have a Jew come and turn on the fire. And that qualifies for this halacha. Like in HEB, a lot of the people who work there are not Jews. So how is the bread, what we said earlier, bread of Jews? It's called pas Yisrael. It's made by Jews because the Jew was involved in the process of the making of the bread, i.e., turning on the oven. And now it's considered kosher bread. Okay. Halacha number 3. Lo asur pas shel akum elo shel chameshes bnei dagan. The sages did not prohibit all bread baked by an idolater, rather only that which was made of the 5 species of grain. When did we talk about the 5 species of grain? Remember, we talked about this. We talked about this about blessings previously, a previous episode of the Everyday Judaism podcast. We also talked about it regarding Pesach, chametz, right? The laws of chametz are referring to the 5 species of grain. What are they? Wheat, barley, oat, spelt, and rye. Afilu pas kitnius, however, bread made from legumes, such as corn, is not considered bread. Eino b'chal pas, it's not considered bread. V'gam eino osur mishum bishulei akum, this bread is also not prohibited under the prohibition against eating food cooked by an idolater. Because this type of bread is not the bread that goes on royalty, on a table of royalty. And therefore, because this is not the bread which is typically served, it doesn't fall in the category of bread. And therefore, so far, I'll give you an example. Crackers, even though they're made of flour, or sometimes they're not made of flour, they're made of other types of, right? That's not what's used as for a meal. So if that's the bread that you like, then even if it's made by a non-Jew completely, it's fine because that's not bread. Right? Today they make bread out of many different things. Right? They have bread out of not only out of these 5 grains. So all of those fall into the category of being okay if they're made. Now, we have to make sure that they're made with kosher ingredients. That's the different issue. And it's an important one, not to be overlooked. But yes, it would not be an issue of non-Jewish bread. Halacha number 4. Pas sheponav tuchen beveitzim asur. Bread whose surface is coated with eggs is prohibited. Sometimes they have they put like a little they baste it or a wash of eggs. The reason they do it, it gives it a nice little shine. Or sometimes they put on top of that, they put different types of toppings, sesame, poppy, or everything, whatever, the pumpernickel, whatever they put on top of that. So that would not be okay because of the eggs that are on top. Mishum beitzim she'olav. Dehavi le bishule akum, because the eggs are food cooked by an idolater. V'osun rikikin shenef ola barzel, those wafers or pancakes that are baked on iron griddles. Yesh lochush shenimshach habarzel be'ez shemen. You have to be concerned that they put oil on the griddle, and do you know if that oil or that fat that was put on was kosher? Again, it brings up a whole new basket of problems. Asurin b'chol inin, these are prohibited unless you know, I guess, unless it's verified that everything that was used was kosher. Mishum blias isur, because the absorption of forbidden foods into the utensils, so that iron griddle can have non-kosher fat that you're now preparing the food on, or preparing, whether it's the pancakes or the bread, if they have, let's say, these things that form the bread, that as well would be problematic. And finally, the fifth halacha regarding bread, and the final halacha regarding the bread, is pas yisrael she'afa'o akum, bread of a Jew that was baked by an idolater. The idolater baked a Jew's bread, so the Jew prepared it and he just baked it. Or you bought him all of the ingredients, okay? Garam mipasakum is dealt with more severely than the bread of an idolater. V'asur mishum bishuli akum, and it is prohibited under the injunction against food cooked by an idolater. Imlo hichshir esatanur ba'ashlachas eitz, unless the Jew made it suitable by contributing to the fire, meaning either adding a wood to the fire or adjusting turning it on, turning on the flame. And one must be very careful about this when sending food to be baked or roasted by a baker who is an idolater. To ensure that the Jew throws a piece of wood into the oven or turns on the fire. Or the Jew should place the bread or the frying pan into the oven, and that way he has an essential part of the baking process. Okay, so this concludes the first part of our Siman here, dealing with the baking of the bread. Now we're going to talk about food cooked by an idolater. Okay, davar she'eino nechol kemo shehu chai, any food that is not eaten in its raw state. Okay, anything. You don't eat eggs straight. You don't eat chicken straight. Even if kosher chicken, kosher meat, kosher, you don't eat it raw. Okay, so it has a process of preparing it. Vigam ola al shulchan malachim, and it is also something that is brought upon the table of royalty. L'lafes bo o esapas o leparperes, as an accompaniment to bread or as an appetizer. Vibishulo o tzlo akum, that was cooked or roasted by an idolater. Afilu bekli yisrael ubebeis yisrael, even if it was cooked or roasted in the utensils of a Jew or in the house of a Jew. Asur mishum bishuli akum, they are prohibited due to the injunction against eating food cooked by an idolater. Aval, davar shuhu nechol kamo shuhu chai, but anything that could be eaten in a raw state, fruits, vegetables. Okay, sometimes you can do grilled vegetables. You can have you can have grilled vegetables, but you can eat it raw. right? Oh, davar shuhu shadavar she'eno chashuv, or something which is not significant. Ve'eno ole al shulchan melachim, and something that is not appropriate to be placed on the table of royalty, of a king. Ein bo mishum bishulei akum, the rule of food cooked by an idolater does not apply in the prohibition against eating it. Ve'ein lachush la'kelim, and in these cases, one may eat food prepared by an idolater, even if it was prepared with his own utensils, and there is no need of concern because of the utensils that may have absorbed the taste of non-kosher food and infused the taste into the food. The stam kelim einum b'nei yomo, because most utensils are not used within a day of within the day. So what does that mean? Let's just back up a little bit and talk about this. So when we talk about the absorption of flavor, okay, the absorption of flavor, there is the 24-hour rule. Okay, the flavor lasts for 24 hours. Okay, so if you take any type of a dish, okay, and you put your hot meat on that dish will absorb the flavor of that meat for 24 hours. So what happens, so let's say a knife, you use the knife for butter. And now by mistake the next day, you use that knife to cut your meat. Oh my gosh, the butter, the meat, milk and meat, right? So if it's more than 24 hours, the flavor does not remain on it. Okay? And therefore, yes, we don't use them. We try to keep them separate. We try to have milk dishes and meat dishes and neutral dishes, what we call parav. But if someone was in a situation where this happened, typically it's not used within 24 hours. Most dishes are not used for 24 hours, and therefore someone who is in a situation where he doesn't know, does have a place to be lenient. Okay. Shivcha akum bebeis Yisrael, regarding an idolatrous maidservant in the house of a Jew, hamevashels b'shvilei Yisraelim, who cooks for the Jews who reside in that house. Noagim lahakel, the custom is to be lenient, mipnei she'efshar shelo yechate echad mibnei habayis bo'esh, because it's impossible for not even a single Jewish household member not to stoke the fire or to adjust the flame. Right? Someone comes in, it's high, lower. Everyone comes around in the kitchen and they see what's going on. They will raise it. So a Jew is involved with some of the process. Halacha number ches. Avol, if this idolatrous maidservant is cooking food for herself in her own little apartment, in her own little quarters, Ein rigilos shechat Yisrael, because it's not common for a Jew to get in there and to adjust the heat of the fire. Ve'efsha delo mehani bezechitui. Moreover, it is possible that stoking will not be effective to make the food permitted in this case. Degora mi'ilu mevasheles b'shvil Yisrael. For this situation is worse than when she is cooking for the Jew. Therefore, if she cooked food items that are included in the prohibition against food cooked by an idolater, which are they're not eaten raw and would be brought onto a table of royalty, lo levad hatavshel osor. Not only is the food that's cooked in it prohibited, but also the pot that was used becomes prohibited to cook in initially. But after the fact, if a Jew did cook in the pot, after the maid cooked in it for herself, he should ask a competent halachic rabbi authority about the status of the food cooked and the pot that was used by the Jew. Okay, halacha number 9. Akum shebishel b'Shabbos b'shvil chole, if an idolater cooked food for a Jew who was sick. Hatavshel asur b'mitzvah Shabbos, the food is prohibited after Shabbos. Afilu la'chole, even to the sick person. Why? Why did they cook for this person on Shabbos? Why they? Because he's sick, right? But after and because a Jew can't cook for him on Shabbos. But after Shabbos, a Jew can cook for him. So now that food becomes invalid for the sick person and or another Jew. Im efsher b'tavshel acher, if it is possible to feed the sick person with other cooked food. Now, if there isn't, again, if there isn't other food, then after Shabbos is also a life matter. And as we mentioned previously, to save a life, you're allowed to do anything. Okay. Ubakelim yesh lahater achar me'es la'es. As for the utensils, they are permitted for use after 24 hours. Like we mentioned previously, after 24 hours, the flavor that would be transferred don't remain in the utensils. Beitza, regarding an egg. Even though you can swallow an egg when it's raw, nevertheless, nevertheless, since it is only eaten that way in pressing situations, if an idolater cooked it, it is prohibited, and the same law applies to all similar situations. So, an egg is not something that people just, crack an egg and drink it. No, you don't just do that. All right, unless someone who's in the opera, so they're singing. Sometimes they use that for their voice. They use an egg. Sometimes people do it as a challenge. I don't know people who just eat eggs straight out of a shell, right? You boil it. You boil. Yeah, there are things you can do, but you don't typically do that. What do you eat it like that? Okay, very good. All right. So now, what do we do? Okay, peiros shalom nisbashlu in halacha number 11. Fruits that have not fully ripened while on the tree, lo nisbashlu be'ilon kol tzarkon, ve'eno ne'acholin chayin elo al yidei adchak, and they're not eaten raw in that state, other than in pressing situations. She'umne mitagnin osam bitzukar. Sometimes professional cooks will fry it in sugar. They'll fry it, right? So in such a case, if an idolatrous cook or chef did this, asur mishum b'shuli akum, they are prohibited due to the prohibition against food cooked by an idolater. Sheichar shel tevua v'shel dvash noagin bo heter l'shtoso. It is custom to permit the drinking of beer that was made from grain or honey, or honey, right? So honey also. Afilu bebayis shemochen oso ha'akum, even in the house where the idolaters sell it. Ve'ein bo mishum bishulei akum, and there's no prohibition of food cooked by an idolater. That tvua betela b'mayim, because the grain is considered to be nullified in the water. Nevertheless, one must investigate and determine that they were fermented. They were not fermented with wine sediment. Okay, rak tzrichim lachkor im ein ma'amidin osam b'shimrei yain. However, in a place where the Jews are lax or lenient regarding the laws against the wine of an idolater, then a scrupulous individual should be stringent and refrain from partaking of their beer as well. So there's an interesting thing. Beer in general is kosher. That we know, all beer is kosher all around the world, because all they do is have whatever the ingredients that they have, which are kosher ingredients, put in their beer. However, today we have we have more and more flavored beers, and the flavorings that they put in are not necessarily kosher flavorings. You need to ensure. So if it's straight beer, Bud Light, or a Dos Equis, or one of those, whatever your favorite beer is. I personally don't like beer, so I don't have any skin in this game. But if one enjoys a beer, you can find beer anywhere in the world, and it'll be kosher. However, if there are flavorings then it can be problematic, and it's preferable for one to look for a kosher certification on it. Now, today, with many craft beers that are being produced in people's garages and whatever, there are problems that have been coming up, and the rabbis just last week put out a notification that there's going to be new restrictions on craft beers that are not in a supervised facility because of some of the different methods that people are using to create beer today, particularly in people's own garages. They use different methods, and therefore it could be a problematic for a Jew to drink them. However, in a place where the Jews are lax and lenient regarding the prohibitions against the wine of an idolater, then a scrupulous individual should be stringent and refrain from partaking of their beer as well. Ube'inyan shtias kafe, regarding drinking coffee, below cholav, even without milk. The imcholav ade aser, because if it's milk of a non-Jew, it is definitely prohibited. Oh, chocolada vite, and same thing as hot chocolate and tea, itzalakim, drinking them in the home or place of an idolater. One who wishes to guard his soul should distance himself from doing so. But some authorities permit drinking these beverages at the home or place of an idolater, but only in a casual manner and informally. Kvius asur, but doing so in a formal setting is prohibited. Okay, so now I want to just explain a little bit about drinking coffee. Milk, we're going to discuss in a minute about milk, but coffee is kosher. Coffee is made from a bean. It's a bean, and the bean is grinded up, and then it makes delicious coffee as we know it. Okay, so there's typically no problem drinking any coffee. Now, again, you have to know what utensils is being used to prepare it. Make sure that those utensils don't have things. For example, today there's a challenge with many coffee shops serve non-kosher food in their coffee shops. Right? You can go to a typical Starbucks and they'll have a bacon and cheese, sandwich that they serve. Now, we're not suspecting they're putting bacon and cheese in your coffee. Okay, that's not the concern, but there is a different concern. So let's say the tongs that they use to take the food in and out of the oven, or the grates that are in that oven, and you see them taking them. They take them off the shelf, put it in the oven. Okay, Joe Schmo, your sandwich is ready, and they put it into a bag. Okay, now that utensil that was in direct contact with steaming hot bacon and cheese is going to be washed. How's it going to be washed? They're going to put it in the dishwasher. Now, okay, fine. Now, what happens to the coffee that was being prepared for you? So they put it, you know how they make the coffee, right? They put it into a little basin, and that basin has all the coffee beans or the little grains, right? And then they put the water through it. And then they take it at the end of the day. What do they do with that same little piece of metal? They put it into the dishwasher. And now what's going on in that dishwasher? All of the bacon and cheese from the tong and that basin are now being mixed together. That's a problem. Okay, so you understand how it could be a problem. Now, it happens to be that today most Starbucks are using a completely new system. All right? When you come in and ask for coffee in most busy Starbucks, they're not doing a whole brew. They just push a button and it comes right out of the machine into your cup. Okay, which makes it much easier for you to have kosher coffee anywhere you go. Now, it's not that the coffee wasn't kosher. The coffee is a bean. It grows from the ground. It is kosher 100% of the time. The flavoring, if you put in vanilla flavoring, you have to be concerned about that. Now, I was traveling with my wife last week, and in the airport, my wife wanted her vanilla latte or whatever, one of those things. So my wife said, I would like to see the ingredients that you put in there. And he showed us the pump of the vanilla, and he showed whatever else they use, and each one had the kosher symbol. And my wife said, "Okay, that's not a problem, particularly when you're traveling, as the halacha said, where there aren't other options." So in that case, it was fine anyway. But okay, so that's you understand that chocolate. Not every chocolate is kosher. Okay, you don't know what else they put in there in the process of making that chocolate. Chocolates many times have oils that are added to it. Those oils sometimes are not kosher. So you understand, it's not such a simple thing for, oh, all chocolate is kosher. It's grows from the ground. Chocolate is also from a bean, right? That's it would be true if they didn't add other things, but there's plenty of delicious kosher chocolate. Okay, so now, and I recommend in general, I recommend drinking coffee without milk anyway, because it just tastes better. Okay, but that's a personal thing. Okay, so all right. So again, if we remember the principle that we mentioned in the beginning of today's class, we will remember that the most important factor here is that we shouldn't become assimilated with our non-Jewish neighbors. That doesn't mean we're not nasty people. We're very nice. We're very friendly, but the idea here is to avoid Jews marrying non-Jews. This was a very, very serious primary concern of our sages and of ours today, not to assimilate and become intermarried with the non-Jews. So we're very good to our non-Jewish neighbors. We're very caring. We're very loving. We're very friendly. We're very charitable. But the Jewish people have a different responsibility, and part of that is to marry Jewish. If someone wants to convert and get married, great. That's their choice. We don't encourage or coerce or proselytize or missionize people to convert. Anybody who feels out of the goodness of their heart they want to become closer to Hashem and His Torah, and they want to convert, great. And if they find their mate that way, even greater. But the coffee could fall into the same problem, because coffee is today used as a social thing as well. And the same is with hot chocolate, and the same is with beer, and so et cetera, et cetera. So these are things that a person needs to just keep in mind. These are things that are relationship builders, and a person should exercise caution. Okay, halacha number 13. We just have 3 more halachas, and we finished the siman. Cholav shechol va'akum, milk that was milked by an idolater, ve'ein Yisrael ro'ehu, where a Jew did not oversee the process. Asura is forbidden, prohibited from being drunk. Afilu lasos mimeno gvinu, even to make it into a cheese. And ideally, tzorech Yisrael liyos betchilas hachaliva. A Jew must be present at the beginning of the milking, v'yur shakli unaki, and to see that the vessel that the cow is being milked into is clean from any non-kosher milk. And it's customary to be stringent. And it is proper and customary to be stringent, to not milk into a vessel that an idolater used to milk into. And regarding maidservants or workers who are idolaters that milk the animals for their Jewish employers, Bebeis Yisrael, Obedir Shalem, in a Jewish home or in the Jewish farm. Kol makom she'ein behen akum mafsik. The halacha is that in a place where no home of an idolater is situated between the home of the Jew and the site of the milking, ein lachosh lebehemat mea, we are not concerned that the maidservant or the worker put in non-kosher milk from a non-kosher animal. It is permitted even initially to allow them to milk. Okay, so if you have your farm right there, right out your house, and they want to go and milk the cow and bring you fresh milk, that's fine, and you don't have to be concerned because they're not stopping by somebody else's house and swapping out the milk. We're not concerned per se that they're going to do this in a sneaky way. Aval im beisakom mafsuk. However, if the home of an idolater is situated between the home of the Jew and the site of the milking tzorch sheyeshem Yisrael, then it is necessary for a Jew to be present to oversee the milking. Va'afilu katan o ktana ben tesha shana sagi. And even a minor, a boy or a girl of the age of 9, are sufficient to confirm that everything is done properly. Gvinos ha'akum asura, halacha number 14, cheeses of an idolater are prohibited. V'im ha'yisrael roa chaliva ve'asiyas ha'gvinos. However, if a Jew supervised the milking and also the making of the cheese, im ha'gvinos b'shas asiyason hein shel Yisrael mutaris, if the cheeses belong to a Jew at the time that they were made, they are permitted. Aval im hein b'shas asiyason shel akum asuras. However, if at the time that they were made the cheeses belong to an idolater, they are prohibited. Okay. Finally, hachema, regarding butter. Talia b'minhag hamakomos. It depends on the custom of the communities in various places. Yesh bekomos she'ein ochlun chema shel akum. There are places that do not touch butter of an idolater. Yesh bekomos she'ochlun osa, and there are places that do eat it. If someone is traveling from a place where they don't eat butter of an idolater to a place where they do, even if he intends to return to his original place, he can eat milk, he can eat the butter with them, he can have the butter on his bread, right? And someone who goes from a place where they do eat bread of an butter from an idolater, and he's traveling to a place where they are stringent and do not eat it, he may not eat it while he's there. Of late, it has been heard that they deceitfully substitute that which they sell as butter with the fat of swine. Therefore, a person should be very, very cautious and distance himself from butters whose ingredients is not known. Okay, if you know. Okay, now this is a very important thing. I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about Chalav Yisrael, milk that was milked by a Jew, versus milk that is not by a Jew. Now, Jew doesn't mean that the Jew is actually doing the milking. It means that it's being supervised by a Jew. Okay, so generally speaking, this is a very big concern. Today, according to the ruling of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, because we have something called the USDA, we have the FDA, we have many regulations in the United States, and if a farm were to mix anything else but cow's milk into that milk, they would lose their license, they would lose their livelihood, they would be sued by the federal government. So there's a fear of someone finding other milk and mixing it in. And therefore, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says that in such a situation, like in the United States, it would not be problematic for anyone to drink any milk in the United States. Cow milk, no problem. You can go to Walmart, to Kroger, to Belden's, to Randall's, to HEB and find milk that's milk. There's only one ingredient in milk, right? There's milk. And it's not a problem in the United States to drink that milk. However, in other places, in other countries where they do not have such a federal oversight, that is a problem. So, for example, if I were to go travel to Israel through Europe, I don't know what the rules are in Europe. I don't know what type of regulations they have. Who knows if they put lard, if they put something else in that milk? I have no idea what they did. So you cannot drink milk in those places without it being known that it's certified to be a kosher milk. Chalav Yisrael. It's milk made by a Jew or supervised by a Jew. Okay, so this is an important thing for us to know. Milk that is now. So again, in the United States today, you have, most of the milk that you'll find. If you just go to a random supermarket and you look at that bottle of milk, you'll see a kosher symbol there. I'm talking about 9 out of 10, and it's not even required. but it's a good thing for it to. Now, the same thing is with butter. What is butter made of today?
Milk.
You know exactly. It says it right there. It's only milk, and that ingredient, they cannot mix anything else in there. Right? Again, you have regulations. Therefore, most butters, and this doesn't apply to cheeses, most butters are fine, but someone who is scrupulous, someone who's God-fearing, wants to ensure, I want to make sure I eat kosher butter that's certified, that has that kosher symbol on it. Okay, so this basically concludes these laws. God willing, next week we're going to talk more about the proper way to conduct oneself when eating a meal. How a person there's a proper way for a person to eat and to drink. This is also in our Jewish law, and we're going to study that, God willing, next week in Siman number 39. But this, my dear friends, concludes Siman 38. And we will now turn it over to you to ask your questions in the Ask Away segments. For those of you who are not here live in our classroom and you'd like to be part of this, like all of these magnificent listeners, you can email us to have your questions addressed in future episodes at askaway@torchweb.org. Askaway@torchweb.org. Now, my dear friends, we're going to turn the questions to you. I look forward to hearing your questions.